Welcome everyone. I'm very glad that you could join us today. My name is Paula Newcomb and I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be the host and question moderator for today's webinar, Technology Competencies and How to Implement Them. And today's webinar is geared towards management. It is presented by Heather Rayl, the Director of Technology and Special Services at the Vigo County Public Library, and Katherine Huddle, Computer Training Support Specialist at the Carmel Public Library. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. If you are having sound issues during the webinar, please see the sound issues box just below the chat box. If there is a global sound issue, we will announce it in the chat box. If you are unable to resolve the sound issue you're experiencing, we are recording the webinar and you can watch it offline after it has ended. Again, if there's a global sound issue, we'll make an announcement in the chat box. If you have a question, just type it in the chat box on the upper left side of the screen. I'll be watching and we'll get your question to Heather and Katherine as soon as there's a good opportunity. And there should be time near the end for questions. The session today is worth 1 TLEU and your certificate will be available for download at the end of the webinar. If you are watching an archive recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your TLEU is in the video's description on YouTube. Also, today's webinar will be recorded and archived. After the webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's Archived Webinars page. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to the Indiana State Library's e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word, and check out our continuing education website for other professional development opportunities. Okay, let's get started. I am now happy to turn the presentation over to Heather and Katherine.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? This is Katherine Huddle with the Carmel Public Library, and thank you so much for joining us this morning for Technology Competencies and How to Implement Them. If we could just get a raise of hands in the room to see how many people were able to join us for our previous session on Technology Competencies and How to Exceed Them. I know we had a large group last time, seeing lots of hands being raised. All right, well, you may see some overlap with today's session, but this session is geared more towards management, as Paula mentioned earlier. All right, you can go ahead and take those hands down. Today we're going to look at introducing ourselves, Heather and myself. We're going to be looking at what competencies are. We'll speak more about 21st century skills. Where do you even start with this process of coming up with your own technology competencies and implementing them at your library? Once you create your competencies, how do you assess and track your training? And more about implementing some training. So as I said, I'm Katherine Huddle. I'm with the Carmel Public Library in the IT department here in Carmel, Indiana. And I've worked for the library for almost 7 years. And I'm going to go ahead and let Heather introduce herself.
Hey, I'm Heather Rayl. I work currently at the Vigo County Public Library. I've been at this library for about a little over a year. Previous to that, I worked at Indiana State University as the Emerging Technologies Librarian. And previous to that, I worked in a variety of positions at the County of Los Angeles Public Libraries for about 10 years before moving back to Indiana.
Okay, thank you so much, Heather. So we're going to start by taking a look at what are competencies. So could we see in the chat who is currently using competencies for technology skills? Or have you tried this before at your library? And I hear from a lot of people that in the past maybe they've tried it and it was a lot of work and then it just didn't go anywhere, that nothing really happened with it. We are not, but we'd like to try it, not yet. Kind of, not as thorough. Well, this is really important to us here in Carmel, and I know with Heather as well. These competencies are lists of basic skills. These are baseline checklists. Here at Carmel, several years ago, we created a committee called Organizational Innovation, and that grew out of our strategic planning goals to just make sure that we could ensure consistently excellent customer service for all of our patrons every time they came into the library. And that came down to the core of ensuring that all of our staff had the same technology skills for basic things, such as ebooks. So if you came into our library 10 minutes before we closed, it doesn't matter who's working a public service desk, anyone could answer your question about how to get your ebook. So we looked through and we actually based our competencies off of a list from Charlotte Mecklenburg and from some medical professionals and from Web Junction and IMLS. And we'll share with you the links here in a few minutes about the competency index for the library field that IMLS and Web Junction created several years ago. There's no need to reinvent the wheel with this. And what Heather and I really wanted to stress the importance of this morning was that these checklists and competencies, these are so specific for your library and your staff and your community. I'm sharing with you a list of the basic competencies for our library, and ILF is now sharing these through their website as well. But things such as computer basics. Do you know where the power buttons are? Do you know to check that a power cord is plugged into your computer? Very, very basic things. And here's a similar list from Charlotte Mecklenburg. And these are lists that you'd actually use with your staff as you evaluate them in person. And these are all across, this isn't specific to libraries. These competencies you can see in enterprise environments and large businesses and corporations. So it's really important that we get up to speed with this so that we can not only help our staff grow, but give our patrons better service and support. These competencies are living documents. Once we actually create these, we want to make sure that they're updated, because I do hear from so many libraries that we put all this time and effort into figuring out what kinds of technology we're using at our library and what skill level we expect certain levels of staff to have with our technology, but they just sat there in a folder, and it's really sad. They're not going anywhere or being used, and we're not acting on them. So as you get new technology and you acquire new things at your library or new apps, or you update your website, it's really important to make sure that you go back in. You have quick access to these documents so that updates can be made as they're needed. It's also in libraries, as job duties are reassigned, I know we all kind of wear that one-size-fits-all hat for everything. You're either fixing a broken toilet or working on a server, whatever you're doing at your library, make sure that your competencies reflect what your staff are actually really doing, which is why it's so important to have open communication with your staff to find out, what are you really using? What tech skills? Do you offer Microsoft Word, but you find that some staff are using Google Drive and Google Docs? You want to find out what they're actually using. And this is what we helped base ours off of several years ago to get us up and running. Web Junction and IMLS got together to create these competency indexes. And for some of ours, I mean, they're very closely worded to give us a good idea of a baseline of where to start with, of what we should expect our staff to be able to know. And really, it's going to be so different. If you don't offer RB Digital, you shouldn't expect your staff to know how to help a patron get the RB Digital app on a mobile device. So really just sitting down, speaking with your staff, your management, if you have an IT department, and seeing what kinds of technology. Do you have self-checks? Whatever you use, that your staff know how to use it and they know how to use it well. So as we mentioned, these competencies are usually tied to specific skills or tasks, such as you know how to fix a paper jam on the printer, or you know how to minimize a window. These are things that would be good organizational awareness. So if you have a scanner, do all of your staff who help the public frontline, do they all know how to use it themselves? Do you have staff who have never used the scanner? Maybe that's a good place to start. These things are changing all the time. It's so hard to keep up with technology, and especially with our library apps like Overdrive and Libby and Hoopla, RB Digital. I think even Tumble Books for our children's department, they have an app as well, and they're constantly updating these things. So making sure that we're keeping our staff up to date, that we know they're being trained, and that we can track their training and progress with these competencies. And we're going to speak a little bit about something we do here at Carmel called learning plans later that help us with that. I love these competencies because it also helps to clarify expectations for staff. And that's really helpful for new hires into your organization so that when people come on board right from day one, they know, even in the job description, that we expect you to have this baseline competency for these basic tech skills. When we went about creating our skills, we wanted to make sure that we had input from our board, from administration, from management, and from all levels of staff. That goes from the director down to our student and adult pages. And with seeking input, that really gives your staff a chance to sit down, and they're going to talk about themselves and their departments. And as they talk about the duties that they have every day and how heavily technology plays into what they do at the library, they may not even realize how tech heavy their jobs are. And we've had a lot of staff say, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I do all of this. I do so much. It's really just eye-opening and reaffirming for staff, and a good way to get everybody engaged and excited about the competencies and the upcoming training opportunities when you first launch competencies in your organization. So why should you use these competencies at your library? These are really helpful for identifying requirements for new hires, and especially for those job descriptions. If you have really old or outdated job descriptions or things that just really don't truly reflect what your staff are doing and their roles these days, these can really help you write those job descriptions or get them updated. And again, standardizing expectations so that when we have patrons come in and say, you know, can you help me get my new iPhone set up? And you have a staff member at the desk who says, no, I can't. That's not in my job description, but he says, my friend told me that one of your librarians helped him the other day. You want to have that consistent experience for all of your patrons. So if you have competencies that clearly state for that level of staff member that all of my public service reference librarians are expected to know how to assist patrons with setting up a new device, then they should be trained on that to a certain level. And maybe at your library, you're not going to do that. So just having that expectation out there and that organizational awareness. And with capturing knowledge from retiring employees, with retirements or vacancies, or even creating new positions at your library, these competencies are going to help you have a better idea of the kinds of skills that you already have that live in-house with staff who may be potential hires to fill these positions as they come around. Identifying departmental gaps and opportunities for growth. I hear from a lot of staff members that maybe they're higher up librarian level and there's nowhere for them to go but to become a department manager, and that will never happen. So if you feel that you're stuck in a position, or you have a staff member who feels that they're stuck in a position, working with these competencies and having goals to work towards can really help give people a sense of satisfaction that we feel vested and we are interested in their growth and their professional development, and can also help prepare them for future opportunities if they do come along. And I like them because it sure makes performance review time easier, especially with our circulation staff. If you have longtime staff who have been working for you for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, year after year asking for the same goals, what do you want me to do? I'm going to dust better next year. Having these technology competencies that we can then grow goals on to work towards for the next year can help people get interested in different types of technology as well, so that when they're presented with a device they've never seen before by a patron, they're not terrified of it. Why should you use these competencies? I love this quote: helping someone improve is easier than replacing them. And I have a little asterisk by this. When you think about the cost that goes into replacing a potential loss of a staff member, there's training time, rollover. If it's a behavioral issue that's a long-time behavioral issue, that's one thing, but with so many free training opportunities, it's really hard not to be able to offer someone lynda.com, Gale courses, public free MOOCs. We have a list that we'll share with you of free online training resources that we really want to show our staff that we're interested in their professional development and we do care about their growth. One issue that we had here at Carmel several years ago when we started doing our implementing our technology competencies was the culture change and getting buy-in from all levels of staff. So with that, I really wanted to encourage this mindset of I get to learn some new skill, not that I have to learn it. I offer at least 1 or 2 technology classes here at the library for our staff every month on different topics, and these are usually TLEU approved. We'll do a formal class that's anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half long on new updates for software or hardware or troubleshooting skills, and then we'll do a fun class. And sometimes it's Snapchat or blockchain or cryptocurrency or whatever's in the news. Maybe it's even just an Apple operating system update. And we call those tech tea time. And we have tea and gadgets, which isn't really a good mix, but it gets people comfortable with the technology. And it's really important for our staff who, in their daily lives, aren't frequent users of smart devices, or maybe they're not using our apps like ebooks. And it's just casual, less formal time to sit down. And that all counts towards continuing education for them for the year. And we do require a minimum amount of 4 years of continuing education every year for all levels of staff. So that's certified and non-certified staff. So even our adult pages have to get 4 hours by the end of the year. The first year that we tried this, we only required 3 hours and 68% of staff completed. The next year, we required an hour more. We said, let's go for 4 hours. That's only 1 hour per quarter. And we tied it into pay. So if you don't finish your 4 hours, you do not receive your annual pay increase. Guess how many people finished their continuing education for the next year? Everybody. So having that there, that really helped incentivize people the first year. We still use that model, but now I have people coming to the regular monthly classes on their own time, and they'll say, I just wanted to learn about Snapchat or Instagram, and I really like coming to these and I learn a lot. Just last week we did one on basic troubleshooting, and I didn't think anyone would come. I had 12 people in a room that could hold 10 people, and I got 2 emails later that day from people saying that they were able to resolve their own technology issues based on skills they learned in that class. So I'm really vested in offering our staff the skills to help themselves and help our patrons. And chocolate and donuts help. I do bribe them sometimes.
So
Okay, so Heather's going to speak.
Hi.
Hi, Heather.
So yeah, here at this is Heather at VCPL. We do things a little bit differently. I want to talk a little bit about the concept of 21st century skills. IMLS put together a really nice list of things that every human being kind of needs to know in the workplace today. This particular section that I've screenshotted here is just about technology literacy, and they talk about all sorts of different kinds of literacies and skills that you need, having to do with critical thinking and decision making and evaluating information and sort of navigating in today's world. And this is sort of the tack that we've been taking in at VCPL. So this is a snap of our performance review, and you'll notice that a lot of these things are really focused on sort of soft, what the industry would call soft skills, right? So judgment, critical thinking, adaptability. We do have job knowledge, right? It's important that you need to know how to do your job, but we have found that if we hire people that have the right soft skills, we can often train them to do the technology stuff that they're not as comfortable with. But it's much harder to train someone to be polite and kind and use their critical thinking skills. Those are skills that take a long time to develop, and the technology ones aren't necessarily as difficult to develop. So, you know, you can train someone how to troubleshoot a computer, but if they just have a bad attitude about it and act like they're annoyed every time somebody asks them for help, that's a much harder issue to address. So if we hire someone and evaluate someone on their attitude when they're at the workplace or before they even get to the workplace, training that technical thing is a lot easier. And again, depends on the staff member, right? So I'm not in the maintenance department, so I'm not expected to know what chemicals to use to clean up a spill. But even our maintenance folks, we require them to have those same sort of soft skills. The emphasis, so why would you go this route? The emphasis is not on specific things a person needs to know, rather than on their ability to be adaptable and learn new things. And it's based on attitudes and mindset that every employee should have. So it's the same across the organization. And like I was describing, hard skills are a lot easier to teach. Those technology things are a lot easier to teach, and they vary from person to person. So it's probably something that you'll need to think about in your own organization, what route you want to go. Could you advance the slides, please, Catherine? So we can't just tell you what to do. At a certain point, you're going to have to decide what's most important for my library, what works the best for my library. And it's going to be different for everyone. If you could advance, please. So we have some guidelines on how to get started if you don't have anything. You need to start at the very beginning with your job descriptions. And I know it's terribly boring and nobody really wants to think about them, but if you don't have them, you need to create them. And if you have them, you probably need to update them, especially if they haven't been touched. Even in the last 3 years, stuff is changing so quickly that you really need to stay on top of keeping good records of what people do. If you don't even have any job descriptions, there are a plethora of job descriptions available just live on the internet. ALA has a really giant list of them. If you ask the Indiana Pub Libraries listserv, I'm sure people would be happy to send you their job descriptions. You can look at job ads of other libraries that are hiring to find them or find phrases. But people need to know what is expected of them in their job before you can evaluate and rate them on it. So that you just have to start with that job description. That's really key. And then if you could advance, thank you. Then you need to think about what sort of policies and procedures are you going to do. So are you going to kind of go the competency route that Catherine has described, or are you going to sort of focus on the soft skills and then address the technology stuff sort of as it's needed? Sorry, I had to get a drink. My mouth is very dry. How often are you going to do it? We'll talk about frequency after a little bit. Are you going to use rating tools? Are you going to self-evaluate, or are you going to evaluate with an individual? Things like that. And then are you going to have consequences if people don't fulfill the rating system, if that's how you're going to do it? And I do want to put in that if you're in a public library, you do need to have a chat with your library board if you are implementing new policies to make sure that they are aware of what your library is doing as well. So I showed you earlier our annual review and what every employee, and so this is sort of the tool that we use to evaluate those things, and this is the section just on technology. And you can see that these are the behaviors in sort of each category that we use to sort of rate the employee. So the baseline employee is receptive to feedback and often uses feedback to improve performance. But above satisfactory, which is what everyone hopefully should be striving for, is an employee that solicits feedback from the supervisor or colleagues, and they work to improve their individual performance. And so these kinds of skills are skills that we feel everyone in the organization should have. And they're adaptable to really every position. Also, even though we do the annual performance review part just once a year, what we tell our managers and what we tell our staff is that there should be no surprises. So if you as a manager are going to rate someone as needs improvement on their annual performance review, that shouldn't come to a surprise to them, because hopefully as a manager, you've been proactive in discussing, I see that you're having problems helping people use Overdrive or whatever skill it is. Let me work with you so we can make you more comfortable doing that. And then, hopefully you've addressed that issue and you won't have to rate someone as needs improvement. But it should never come as a surprise, and continuous feedback and instruction and just talking to your employees as a manager is essential in this process. And I think I can hand it over to Katherine for a little bit.
All right, thank you so much, Heather. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we turn those technology competencies into skills assessments. So once you have those baseline competencies established, here at our library, we have so many different levels. We have up to 11 different levels of staff. So I have, you guessed it, 11 different levels of competencies, and then there are even more. So in our reference department, we have a manager, we have our level 7 full-time MLS librarians, and then we have our reference assistants who are level 6s. And some of them just work the reader's advisory desk, or some of them have technology room in our public computer labs requirements. So those competencies are tailored to what that person does here at the library. In my IT department that I work at, we have 3 people. We all have 3 different sets of skills and job requirements, so we have 3 different competencies and checklists to assess at the end of every year. So it did take me a lot of time to sit down and meet with people, and even our finance manager, finding out that he uses a specialized piece of accounting software. He's the only person in the building that uses it, but we want to make sure he knows how to use it to the best of his ability. So they are really tailored to what every person here needs to know. So once I have those competencies, I use Google Sheets, which is an alternative to Microsoft Excel, to go in, and I'm literally copying and pasting those competencies to create a skills assessment for all of our staff. This goes out towards the end of the year, and this is self-reporting on a scale of 1 to 5. So 5, you are so good at some of these skills you could teach someone else how to do it. And a 1 is I have no idea what you're talking about. When we first started doing this, people were writing in zeros. I had a negative 55 one year. So some people are really honest with you in these self-reports, and they'll say, I know I need more help in this area, and I'm willing to admit that. And some people do not want to admit that they need help, and they rate themselves 5s, plus, gold stars on everything. And sometimes you can speak with a manager, or if you are the manager, you can right away tell somebody just blew through this survey, and you need to sit down with them and say, I need to actually see, or I have seen you not be able to do this skill. I know that you're not at the level you claim to be. And we need to work on these skills. So sometimes you can just assess visually, monitoring your staff or working closely with them. But these assessments, once they're filled out, give us a good baseline to work towards. So anything that a staff member self-reports as being a level skill 3 or less, I turn into an individualized learning plan goal. So we'll speak a little more about those learning plans, but those help create goals using SMART goals that staff can work towards to actually take action items to fulfill their training and requirements throughout the year. And I hear a lot, we don't have time to get our work done as it is. We have so much piled on us, and it's really hard to get things done, but the nice thing about this is we have 12 months in the year. We stretch this out. That's why here at Carmel we wanted to require the 4 hours a year so that we could get at least 1 hour in quarterly. So you're not binge learning. I hate that when people come in at the end of November or December and say, I have no credits yet this year, or I have 1.5 hours of learning. Well, you know what? You have a week to go. You're going to have to binge 3 hours, and then you're probably not going to retain as much as if you had spread out your learning throughout the year. but it is really difficult to find the time to learn these new skills. So the best thing that we found and that I use myself is that we schedule it. If you have a calendar system built into your email or you use one, we use Google Calendar in our email system here with Smarter Mail, schedule
And
it
this is Heather,
and
if
start
if I could
small.
just butt in
Hey,
really
Heather.
quick. And if you're a manager in charge of staffing a service desk, schedule your employees with off-desk time specifically for training. It's really key because, your employees probably have on-desk and off-desk time, but if you instruct them like this off-desk time is specifically set aside for you to work on XYZ, that will really also help encourage them to use that time productively as well. Sorry to interrupt, Catherine, but I just wanted to make that
Heather, that's such a good point. When you come into our library, you're going to see a lot of managers out on public desks. And with our reference department, our teen services, children's, you're going to see managers out on desks because they have large departments and they are supporting their staff by allowing them to take time away from the desk for a while to step back and either watch a webinar, get hands-on. We have something called a Tech Tinker Box with gadgets where staff can work through activities for ebooks and things like that. But it's really hard to accomplish those tasks when you're on the desk and you're trying to manage so many different things and answer the phone and assist patrons, that providing that to your staff, it's a huge benefit. And really, if you're having a hard time getting them the off-desk time, start small. Give them small goals of half an hour a week or whenever they're scheduled in, and then work up to maybe the once a month requirement of an hour. Some of our library departments here require more than 4 hours. That's just a minimum. Lynda.com is free for all Indiana library staff through the state library. I can't stress that enough. Otherwise, that's a really expensive resource that may not be financially feasible for every library. And it's been a godsend for us. There's so many resources and tools there, and it's perfect for self-paced, self-directed learning. I don't work for Lynda, I work for the library, but I love it so much because our staff can pause those videos and come back to them. Again, we don't want that binge learning. We want to chunk things into smaller learning segments. And maybe they just need a small portion of a video to refresh themselves on something in Excel, and they just need a 3-minute video clip from it. They also have activities to work through, and it's something that you can watch with transcripts on and closed captioned. So I watch these out at public desks when I'm in the computer lab and am able to read and work on these activities while I'm still working at a desk. And really that micro learning, chunking things into smaller segments will help your retention and just make sure that staff are getting the training they need when you know you can't get them an hour dedicated off desk time. And I see Colleen is typing. Let's see if she has a question. All right. All right, so once you get the training going, how do you actually track what your staff are doing? Again, just like with the competencies, you don't need to reinvent the wheel with this. I'd like to share the tracker that we use here at Carmel that's really simple. We just made this in Google Sheets, or you could use this in Excel. And you just want to have a list for every single staff member in every department. This is also great for certified staff so that if you are, we never want to have audited, that you have records of everything, even if that's something that's really informal that you've done in-house, just as a refresher that you're tracking everything. And by the end of the year, you may be really surprised by how much learning your staff are doing.
Yeah, this is Heather. It doesn't even have to be a spreadsheet if you hate using Google Docs or whatever. Even just writing it down, having a log, a paper log that you keep is a beginning. Start with tracking. It's just writing it down is key. Writing it down somewhere and just keeping a list of what you're doing.
And I see Colleen and Wendy are talking about continuous improvement. That's really what this is all about, that especially in our environment where we work, that we're promoting continuous learning and providing all this information and resources to the public. But we really need to do ourselves a great service as well by promoting this with our staff too, that this is really important to us, and that especially for MLS staff, when you graduate, that's not the end of the road, that there are always new things to learn, and that even for our director, there are always skills that you can grow, so that if you're out supporting the library at a local group and someone asks you, do you even have ebooks at your library? Yes, you better know we have them, and you better know how to help a patron get it on their mobile device.
And that continual learning drive is one of those 21st century skills that I talked about a little earlier. So it really is important to sort of build that into.
All right, so I really like this quote. If you have a goal but you don't have a plan, that is just a wish. And when we're making these competencies, as we work towards creating goals that could come out of those self-assessments that our staff are working on, if they don't use SMART goals, they may never really act on the things that they need to work on to improve. So here at Carmel, we create individualized learning plans for staff based off of those self-assessments. So I've just spent the last month and a half working on these, and I meet with all of our staff for one-on-one 30-minute meetings to really go over the items. So anything that was self-reported as a 3 or lower, we turn those into goals on a learning plan. And with the learning plan, they set time throughout the year and it's scheduled. So if your goal is, I need to learn how to help a patron install the Libby app on a mobile device, I want to see 3 or 4 dates throughout the next year when you plan to work on this in several different ways. So maybe one way would be, I'm going to sit down and install this on my own device. And then 3 months later, I'm going to sit down and review it again by watching a webinar from the vendor. And then a month after that, I'm going to do this. But I want to see it stretched out and actually timed in. And once the staff member has actually completed that goal, they go back into the learning plan and check off, and their supervisor checks off when they completed that goal and that action item. So if it's really also not relevant, it's really hard to, if you have a staff member who says, I don't like ebooks, I'll never use ebooks, I like the smell and the feel of the real book. I understand that too, but a lot of our patrons, we see our ebook statistics keep going up and up. And if you're a frontline staff member, it's expected of you, it's in the job description. And these are questions you're going to have to answer. And I don't want you to be scared when patrons come up to the desk with a device and you have no idea how to answer the question. So this will make your job easier, but we want to make sure that we're giving you the tools that you need to learn how to help those patrons. Heather, do you have anything on SMART goals you'd like to add?
I don't think so. I really do think that the acronym says it all. It doesn't do any good to have a goal that's not specific enough or you're not able to measure it. I mean, the same thing applies to sort of any sort of goal setting, like strategic planning or in your own personal goals. They have to be specific, measurable, and achievable, and that relevant and time bound is really helpful when you're in an employment situation. And you can, if you said that you're going to learn how to install Libby on your device at a certain time, it gives you accountability. So
with accountability, that's a good leeway into this. What happens if you have this learning plan and you've given staff ample opportunity the whole year to work towards these goals, and we don't see progress, or we don't see progress where we'd like it? I'm going to hand it over to Heather to let her speak a little bit more about performance plans and tips for improvement.
Sure. So one of the things that we try to stress here at VCPL is that we need to develop continuous feedback. So if you see an employee struggling, address it right away. Don't let it just continue. It's important to be honest with yourself and with your employees, and even if it might be a difficult conversation, it's still an important conversation, and you shouldn't be putting it off until that one time of year that you maybe traditionally do your evaluations. It also helps to make the employee accountable, but also as a manager, you need to be a human, right? So change is hard, and if someone is struggling, involve the employee in finding the solution or finding training. If they are involved, they will be more committed, and they will sort of own that accountability. But if something comes up, you do have it in your purview to be a human and say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's see if we can find a different way or a different solution to this issue. And this would do for, and even like soft skills training, honestly. You do need to document. So if you've asked, if you, an employee, have discussed what, this is what we're going to work on. We're going to work on learning how to use Libby. And these are the steps, just like Katherine is doing with her individualized learning plans. These are the steps that we're going to be doing. And this is the date that we're going to have them done by. Communication, again, is key. Just going back to that continuous feedback. It should never, ever be a surprise if somebody is struggling. And then you have to follow through. If you've said that you're going to check with your employee in 3 months' time, check with them in 3 months' time. But hopefully you've also checked with them between that time as well, because again, continuous feedback, continuous working with someone, checking up with them. How are things going? Have you been able to do XYZ on a consistent basis? And the more you do it, the easier it'll get. And hopefully they'll feel comfortable coming to you in the future as well if they are struggling with something, if maybe they hadn't before. Do you have anything, Katherine, to add on that?
Yeah, especially with the first year, if you try this is rough going at first. Especially with those skills assessments and introducing the competencies, there are people that get really scared. And maybe they know that they identify weaknesses in themselves, but really if you communicate that this is not to penalize you in any way, we're not doing this to be mean, this is just to help us, that we're trying to help you so that we can help serve patrons better. And that this isn't a test, I don't want to use that word, I use Kahoot here at the library with our staff and the public for formative assessment to kind of measure learning and identify some gaps. But we play games, we try to make it fun as much as possible because it can be a little intimidating, especially if it's new. And technology can be really intimidating in general, so we try to make it fun and do different things with it. But yeah, it can be pretty intimidating at first. So just giving as much support as you can and offering different types of learning opportunities.
That's also, yeah, a really good thing, offering different types. So some people may really hate webinars. I am actually one of those people, and I don't do great with webinars.
I also hate webinars.
I do much better with face-to-face training. I just think it's more engaging for me. I know face-to-face can be difficult though. So maybe pre-recorded is the way that your particular employee will succeed. It just depends, and it's really different for everyone. Or maybe they just need a mix of things. So just being able to work with the employee who is struggling with a skill is particularly helpful.
And I know Heather's mentioned the emphasis is really important here at Carmel too of soft skills. One thing we did a few years ago was we had all of our staff do a building-wide Strengths Finder assessment. And Strengths Finder is a great book that comes with a unique code that you enter online. So you take a test, and it's a pretty long test, to help identify staff specific skills. So you may find that you have one staff member who is really outgoing and has a specific skill set, and you can help identify learning trends to tailor this training through Strengths Finder as well. Okay, so we asked for some questions ahead of time, and we wanted to share some questions with all of you. How do you check up on staff's continuing technology education? This person says that they have an assessment they use at hiring, but following up with those check-ins on weak areas fall by the wayside, and I hear that so frequently. And we don't make mastering these part of annual reviews. I think that you said it right there at the end, that making these part of annual reviews gives you a concrete way that by the end of the year or whenever you do your reviews, that this is routine, that every year it's expected of staff to do this. This is just part of the job.
Yeah, so
we check up on these. Yeah.
Again, tie it back to your job description and consequences, right? So if you don't do these things, then you don't get this thing. Or maybe it even goes as far as you don't continue your employment relationship. So having employees be accountable and building in that check-ins. And And it probably will, honestly, fall with the manager because the manager is the person who sees the employee most often. And making them a part of your review process.
It's and especially with things like Google Calendar, you could actually make yourself a separate calendar as a manager for training and call it your training calendar and sit down and schedule. Maybe it's once a month, it's quarterly, but we check in with our staff quarterly. I do as the training supervisor for technology to review that progress on the individualized learning plan. So that's a shared document between the staff member and myself. It's private and no other staff members have access to that, but I can check in and see what kinds of webinars or activities or workshops or classes they're doing to meet progress towards those goals. And if not, I can shoot them an email with, hey, I saw this really cool webinar that may be pertinent to one of your goals. Why don't you check it out? As a little push, I also send out a monthly technology newsletter that includes some great webinars and happenings from across the country, within the state, and that what we're doing in our building. Also has some fun things like TED Talks and podcasts. There's a great podcast for libraries called Circulating Ideas. So I even have podcast recommendations for circulation staff. And if you're lucky and you're behind the scenes at a desk, like in technical services, where you may have the opportunity to listen to a library-related podcast, I'd count that as continuing education. So maybe that even means changing your mindset about what you would consider continuing education requirements. That's a good one. From a management point of view, we need to measure our competencies and have staff either catch up or move ahead. What's the best way to do this without boring all of the people who are already doing a great job and are on top of their technology and their learning? We had this here at Carmel. This was a big one. And again, those individualized learning plans, those are tailored for people's job description and their level and their department. And when I see people who are really strong and they maybe only have one goal to work on for the next year, I like to really offer additional growth opportunities. So we recruit those staff and we ask them, would you be interested in leading workshops or classes here for staff at the library or for the public? So for example, a few years ago, we had a staff member in the audiovisual department who was great with streaming services and streaming devices like Apple TV and Roku. And I noticed on her technology plan that she was doing a great job. She only had a few things to work on, but I asked, would you like to teach a class here for staff at the library on those streaming devices? And that was a great opportunity for her to work on public speaking and for getting a workshop set up. So that's also takes some time off of you as a manager from getting that content created yourself. And also,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, Heather, go ahead.
As far as like getting that baseline, using that that initial self-assessment can be really helpful, and that way you're not making everyone take the same test or whatever. And then once the employees do the self-assessment, I have the managers also go through them because, again, like Katherine pointed out earlier, some employees might be more confident than what they actually are on particular skills. So doing that initial self-assessment is probably the easiest way for everyone to sort of take their own inventory of what they're good at and what they need to work on, and then having managers review that. And that way you can identify people who do need to catch up, and then you can identify people who are on top and need to maybe expand their skills rather than work on the skills that are specifically needed for their job that they're maybe not so strong in.
We also offer here at Carmel, we do Overdrive specialists. So anybody who has already reached a level 5 competency for Overdrive or Libby apps with our ebooks and digital audiobooks, they can opt in to receive additional training through webinars and one-on-one classes and workshops to become a specialist. So they're people that we've seeked out and have agreed that they'd like to perform a mentor opportunity with other staff, and that has also helped reduce the number of questions that have made it up to upper level triage of tech support. But that's just another opportunity to give staff time to grow those skills when they're already pretty competent. But I saw a question from Barb about making time, and it's really schedule it out and do it in smaller chunks. So start really small. And it's hard with vendor webinars like this one. If it's an hour long, maybe that's not right for your library. For example, this past summer, we adopted Beanstack for our summer reading program here at Carmel. And the webinars were mostly about an hour long, some were an hour and a half or 2 hours long, and it just really wasn't feasible for us to have 50 staff members sit in a 2-hour webinar, and then maybe there were still things they would need to know that weren't included in the webinar that would be pertinent for our library. So I sat down and I watched the webinar. We had one person watch it, and I created a smaller 45-minute session that would include the information that just we needed to get our information out to the public.
And this is
2.5-person library.
Another thing that we've started doing here at VCPL is we purchased Niche Academy, and they have a lot of pre-recorded, not pre-recorded, but webinars and like small trainings on library-specific topics like Libby or I can't even think of what they are at the moment, but that are available for staff and for the public. And so we've trying to encourage staff to use those. And then we've started also adding our own content. So like we're working on one for making room reservations in the product that we use for that. So I think just trying to see what you're capable of in your library. Like if you can't afford Niche Academy, you know, that not everyone can. So I know that Overdrive is really good about using creating tutorials on all sorts of things. Maybe use those. Someone else is saying handouts. Yes, have internal guides. Even if they're just in Word, you can, there's free screencasting software that you can then throw up on YouTube and make them private so only your staff can see them. So there's all sorts of ways that you can provide training opportunities for your staff that don't need to cost your.
And I love this. I see Angelina mentions that she uses theater. We're really lucky here. We have a lot of staff members who are interested in local theater, and that's a great way. It's non-threatening, it's fun, it gets people excited. And if you're doing even role playing with your staff with these things, we do these with technology and with soft skills as well. So you can role play the happy patron versus or the angry patron versus the staff member. It's really hard when you have a staff member who watches a webinar and then trying to translate those skills into real world situations where maybe you have a patron who needs to get a document printed within the next 10 minutes, or they said, I have to get it to an office, I'm going to be deported, the printer's jammed, what do I do? When you're under stress, we panic, and just remembering to calm down. If you've worked through a similar situation before, these role-playing exercises and maybe even making little songs or raps out of it, whatever's working for you or that your staff would be interested in that makes learning work for them. It's relatable.
Right, and like I too love role playing kinds of things, but some staff are really turned off by those. So, but even brainstorming and thinking about what would I do in this situation can really help lay those. We're kind of off the track of technology specific, but it can help lay those neural pathways. So when we do safety training, for instance, we stress that you need to think the entire situation through, because if you've already thought about it, it's easier to just do it when you're under pressure.
And I see Jennifer mentioned her how-to guide that has information and handouts on things that you need, but you maybe don't do it all the time. That's great.
Really great.
We have a staff wiki here at Carmel where it's searchable, and I know you can do Control F to find in documents that are online. If you're just searching for one piece of information on things, one of the things that comes up with this is our public copiers. They don't get used that much like the printers do. So maybe you just need to know one piece of information really sporadically. That's a great idea, Jennifer. Do we have any more questions? See, Jennifer's typing.
Yeah, like I said, the role playing can be a tough pill to swallow for people, but often people are okay with talking with their colleagues, talking through a situation, and even that can help lay those pathways of getting through difficult situations. No other burning questions?
I see lots of people typing.
Oh, the title.
The Tech Toys Knowledge.
The title
Yeah,
of the
Carol,
last
that's great. We have a program
webinar.
that we stole slash borrowed from Muncie called Digital Climbers, and that's a public program for kids. But our tech toys, like Ollie, we also teach staff that, and that's a great fun way to get people introduced to technology that's not as scary and intimidating. If you have Ozobots or Dash and Dot or any kind of fun technology that you're using with children, use it in a staff training. Use it in a staff development day.
Um,
At least that raises awareness that you have it and that they know where to go.
Deborah mentioned, would you please repeat the title of the last webinar? I think it was Technology Competencies and How to
And how to
Exceed
exceed
them.
them.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, so I mean, it was a very parallel title. Let's see. Choo, 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 choo. How do you motivate people to improve performance when raises aren't on the table? Well, I mean, their continued employment relationship is a pretty strong carrot, which isn't necessarily fun, but that is something that, you know, if you really are having problems with an employee, that at a certain point that becomes an issue. Um,
And yeah, Heather, I think with Barbara's question, trying to motivate that performance, um, if you start using the competencies and you have the self-assessments and you're able to create goals with a learning plan and you can hold people accountable to that learning plan and they're not performing the continuing education that they need throughout the year, if you retest them and ask them to actually perform these skills in front of you and they fail to do so, you can then talk about a 30, 60, or 90-day performance improvement plan. And those PIT plans, nobody wants to hear that. So that really right there is a motivator too. And I hate motivating by fear, but if you've been given a whole year to work on a topic and you've been given opportunities to do so and you fail to do that, then it is time to talk about that performance improvement
and then
plan. And I saw
sorry,
someone, go
I
ahead,
also
Heather.
wanted to say, like, maybe it's time to have a conversation, like, um, why are you having problems with this, right? So, um, there was an employee that was really upset maybe with the migration. I went through a giant ILS migration, County of Los Angeles, and there were employees who were just, it really was difficult for them. And sometimes they just need to vent, and maybe that's what you need to provide so they can vent their frustration with this um, technology that they have to learn. Um, and maybe after they vent, they get over it and they can move on. Um, if you have a conversation with them and ask them, why are you having so much problem with this? Is there something we can do to make this easier for you? Having the employee participate in solving the problem often gets that buy-in as well. Especially if you make it clear, you know, that this, I know you may not enjoy this, but it is part of your job description. I like saying I hate doing time cards. I really hate it, but it's in my job description. I have to do it. So I have to do it. It's not something that I get to pick and choose. Um, but motivation can be difficult, certainly. Carol pointed out that time off, getting time off as an incentive, is really nice, and definitely that's something a little easier to implement because if you get the same raises as a pay schedule that it's just sort of, your cost of living or whatever. Time off is a nice carrot as well. We actually do that with a wellness program here. That if you participate in wellness programs throughout the year and you get a, a physical from your doctor, then you get a personal holiday that you can take in the next year. So that's a nice carrot. But you could do the same thing for technology training or soft skills training in general.
All right, I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, we're going to share our email addresses on the screen as well. There's Heather's email. Please let us know if you think of anything later on. And thank you so much,
Yes.
Heather. And
Thank you,
Paula.
Catherine and Paula.